Hello readers and watchers all. My review today is for a book that I got from my recent book haul from the 10 for $1 op shop. We've got Knight's Edge, and when I saw it on the shelf of the op shop I read this as the author being Charlaine Harris. I imagine that many people who like supernaturally type books know about Charlaine Harris. She wrote the Sookie Stackhouse series. She wrote some other series as well, and I don't actually think that the Sookie Stackhouse is her best series. She's got some pretty good supernatural writing. But Sookie's story, Dead Until Dawn or Dusk, or all the Dead series, they ended up being turned into True Blood on HBO, which was, I've got to say, first series was fabulous. Loved it. Now, because I read the Sookie Stackhouse up until, I don't know, number 10 or 12 or something, I was curious about Charlaine Harris. I think she's a good author. I think she conceives good stories, and her writing style I quite like. I don't think she's as wonderful as some people claim she is. I think she's good. Now, after I picked it up, I realised that this wasn't a book by Charlaine Harris. This was a book of 3 separate stories. They might even qualify as novellas. They might be large enough. Charlaine Harris and Maggie, Shayne and Barbara Hambly. I hadn't heard of the other 2, and I assumed that this was a volume basically with one token Charlaine Harris and a couple of fanfic, probably set in the same vampire universe of Sookie Stackhouse. And I was wrong about that. But because I bought it for the Charlaine Harris book, I read the Charlaine Harris story first, and that's Dances in the Dark. And this, it was good. To me, it felt essentially like a modernized fairy tale on the dark supernatural theme with a vampire as Prince Charming. It was a stock character. His name was Sean, but basically it was Prince Charming in vampire form. In older fairy tales such as the Charles Perrault's, I'll probably pronounce him wrong, from the 1600s, the damsel in distress is rescued by the prince. Usually within fairy tales, Mills and Boon, or modern supernatural romances, the prince is handsome, romantic, wealthy, exotic, powerful, strong, or in this case a vampire, and a bit of all of the above. The characteristics and the characters are both essentially interchangeable between prince and damsel, whether it's dark supernatural romance or whether it's Mills and Boon or whether it's a fairy tale from the 1600s. Doesn't matter too much. In this particular book, Dances in the Dark, you've got a vampire. He saves her, the damsel's life, whatever her name was, by making her undead. The background theme was pretty good. You've got damsel in question is trying to study a university or college or whatever you call it degree after bad breakup. The only way she can bad breakup, worse than bad breakup, it's pretty grisly, but it's only lightly touched on. She can only make a living by dancing professionally, ballroom, blah blah blah, whatever, for a person who provides dancers for events. She does that. The shtick for this particular business is that it's a human and a vampire dancing together, and a vampire bites them at the end. It's a good story. I enjoyed it. Charlaine Harris provides what she always provides, which is a fun reading experience. I read it fast. It was good. The ending was a bit stereotyped in that he has to turn her into a vampire to save her life, whatever. The situation, however, was actually quite fun to read about. I'm on board with the fantasy of the vampire within reason. The theme of great sex with no consequences. Basically, it's great sex with no consequence. Every adult who likes a bit of sex writing in their life is going to enjoy that. It's pretty mild, it's easy reading, it's predictable, fluffy fun, and I enjoyed it. But I have to say that it's somewhere near the ending you get, I had to die to get justice. And it's a fine ending and it's a fine epitaph. So Charlaine Harris was the last story in the book. The next one was someone else's shadow. And as soon as I started reading it, I realised that I had been quite wrong about Barbara Hambly. She is no fanfic writer. Then this wasn't a story based on anything of Harris's that I could tell. Barbara Hambly apparently has her own very respectable and very reasonable career, and honestly, I found her story more engrossing than the Harris one, and her writing a lot better. The only common theme with Harris's story was that the main character is a dancer, which was nice. I liked that part of it. And you hear more about dancing in the second story than you did in the Charlaine Harris story. The supernatural theme in this one, which is called Someone Else's Shadow, is provided by a haunting building somewhere in America. I think it might be New York. This is old building, and it's got a very nasty, very ancient ghost that's inhabiting it and will randomly, but over the years, kidnap pretty vulnerable young women. The woman who's in danger in this story isn't the main protagonist, which is also nice. So you have her and the romantic interest, but they're protecting a third party. I thought that made for a more interesting dynamic than the classic male-female dynamic that many of them of supernatural romances have. And I liked the writing. I thought the writing was good. The romance was pleasant, it was inoffensive, and far more enjoyable than a lot of the dark supernatural romancy type genre can be. Often they are slushy nonsense, but Barbara Hambly wrote a good one with a reasonable romance. It was maybe a little bit insta-love or more like insta-lust, but it was okay. And the main protagonists were both interesting, so I liked that. The female protagonist is primarily a ballet dancer, and I totally respected the way ballet dancing was depicted in this book. It wasn't depicted as next stage up from exotic dancing, though it was represented as something for whom some people do that as well. It was described as an integral part of Middle Eastern celebration, and I enjoyed that. I loved the use of tarot cards in this book. It wasn't a heavy influence on the story, but where it existed, it was well done. I enjoyed the fact that the male lead was a musician. Yeah, look, I thought it all held together really well. It was a good story in its own right. My only real negative feeling about this, as I put it down, was, is it that all women in dark supernatural romances absolutely have to be coming out of a bad ex-romance, that they have to be overcome their feelings with the assistance of the amazing leading man? Like, is it a contract or something? You have to be scarred from a previous romance to be worthy of being bitten by a vampire or defeating a ghost or something? Oh, look, I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, onto the third story in this book that I read, which was actually the first one in the novel. I was reading them backwards, starting from Charlaine Harris. The first one was written by Maggie Shayne. Now, Maggie Shayne apparently also has a very respectable career of her own. She's on Goodreads. I can see that she's got quite a lot of books, quite a lot of followers, and quite a lot of readers. I am not going to be one of them. She is not for me. This first story, I felt the writing was very poor, the plot was very superficial, and the yawn-inducing part of the romance was such a predictable hate to love. It was bludgeoning you over the head with a mallet, and it was idiotic. I'm sorry, Maggie Shayne. She can scorn me all she like. After all, she's a published author, and I'm someone making poor YouTube videos on their Android phone, so she's in no danger from my opinion, but honestly, idiotic is the kindest thing I can say about this story. It's a, I hate you, come rescue me. It's like, we hate each other. Why don't I rescue you? Oh wow, we hate each other and we've never exchanged 5 words that weren't horrible to each other, but why don't we just sleep in the same bed half naked? Because that makes sense. I mean, I could feel my IQ dropping just reading this nonsense. And by page 70, I was already skim reading. 90% of this story is him versus her versus him, yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. There was nothing in it. I finished this story by skim reading dramatically because I did want to get the supernatural part of the story, and I just didn't want to have to deal with any of the rest of it. So, of 130 pages, no, 129 pages, this story, the actual supernatural part of the story could probably have been done in 10 pages, and all the rest of it was him telling her how much he hates her telling him how much she hates him, her telling him that he's a complete fraud and there is no such thing as the supernatural, and then running to him so that he can exorcise the ghosts from her house while telling him that he's a fraud and that she hates him. And I'm bored. I'm bored just thinking about this book. Sorry, not this book, this particular story in this book. And I believe, I have high hopes that I can forget this story forthwith and never remember it again, except for this review, which will warn me to never ever read Maggie Shayne again. Oh yes, and in conclusion for these 3 stories, yes, indeed, every single female lead character in a dark supernatural romance absolutely does have to have had a bad past relationship, which the wonderful hero will help her get over. Even if he doesn't rescue her in any other way, he will rescue her from the shades of her last bad romance, because she can't do that on her own. It is apparently in the contract. So that was this book, Night's Edge. 3 stories that I did quite enjoy, finished them quite fast. If you like dark supernatural romances, by all means. If you enjoyed Charlaine Harris's other books, you will probably enjoy this story, and I did too.